Hello, this is Jensen. You might also know me as the best mid lane LCS, or at the very least you will soon enough, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Forget the eye test, because my camera quality is more busted up than Lena's conception of conflict of interest or Nico's understanding of who kicked who in FaZe. How about the taste test? Because gamer subs taste delicious. Nice flavours with subtlety to them. Don't have to taste like candy or extreme chemicals to get it down. You can make it stronger if you like, but I enjoy a little bit of the watery flavour to it. Feels more refreshing. And I tell you what, this offer's pretty tasty too. All this weekend until the end of December 13th, you can get 20% off your order using the code Thorin, Thorin, at gamersubs.gg. So try it for yourself. Better than the usual 10%, right? Now, the point of this video, the title, is not that there is no eye test, point blank period. Don't even know why I'm saying like point on that one. That's some American shit. Like, full stop. There is no eye test in esports right now in the general concept. Like, I just look around and I see so many people, not just fans, not just pro players, but even experts, even coaches who have knowledge in certain areas. They have incredible vertical understanding of aspects of the game. They've watched loads of the game. They've got experience. They've been fans for many years. They've played the game. Many areas where they might be ahead of me. In CSGO, almost certainly not. In League of Legends, certainly. But the problem is I look around and I don't see people using an eye test to make their decisions. Instead, what I see is Reddit narratives, player, as in pro narratives, and stats. And these are the three false idols. So let's start out. The eye test, the premise of it. The eye test is where you watch the player play the game, you watch the team play the game, you watch the match, but it's not as simple as looking for things that are flashy or just basic competence of like, oh, I did that correctly. For me, the eye test is where your intuition, the subconscious that you've trained to understand and take in the information, overlaps with how competently the player plays in the context of his role and what he's doing now, and how skilled he appears to be, what agency he can have over the game, how he can manipulate the mechanical components of the game. By the way, in this video, I'm going to use both League of Legends and CSGO examples, but I'm going to purposely do the CSGO example first and the League of Legends example second for each case. So in CSGO, the eye test for a player like Henny, if you go right back to 2016 when he was in that Immortals team, it looked good if you only watched the highlight clips. His best kills, his fastest kills would look crazy. Wow, this guy's mechanics are nuts. But if you just watched a whole game, go back and watch almost any whole match, and you'll see, he's whiffing a lot of these. He's out of position there. Played way too aggressively. Wow, what a weird gamble. Like, he had an AWP there. Why did he do that? And suddenly you go, actually, the eye test, you don't pass it. So actually, he wasn't an eye test player in the true sense. Zipnix rarely had good stats, but was unreal in the eye test. You watched how his decision-making was, what he was doing in the context of where he was, in the context of his skills. He passed the eye test like a motherfucker. In League of Legends, if you watch Inspired in Season 9 when he was playing with Rogue, yeah, he had some good pop-offs. He had some really good moments. But he clearly lacked most of the other elements that an elite jungler would need. What Jankos had at the time, what Smithy has but sometimes doesn't have in terms of the mechanics. He was obviously only doing it on a few champions. But in the same season, Season 9, over in North America in LCS, Froggen wasn't flashy in the spring split. He didn't outplay people much. He didn't play all the strongest meta champions, but he was really clutch. He was consistently good in his lane, consistently good in team fights, and he knew how to win the game on his terms with the teammates that he had. So to me, the eye test is the ultimate guide when it comes to the game. Basically, it's the top level of how you discern truth, what's real, what has meaning in the game. So an analyst or an expert, in my conception, should be sort of like a Mentat from Dune, when the premise in the Dune universe was, because they had like a big civil war where AIs, or robots sort of, turned against humans, they ban all computer machines that can think. You're not allowed to make them. So as a result, humans develop techniques in their mind that allow them to operate sort of like a computer, taking massive amounts of data, observe patterns, foresee things that haven't yet happened using projections. So in this sense, that's how I see an analyst or an expert. They're training their thought processes, their observational skills, the principles or the rules in this sense that order how they think of the game, what's good, what's bad, what their hierarchy of values is. And then, once this has been trained to a certain degree, it's like you can read the matrix. You can see the game, and you don't just see a game. You don't just see a nice kill. You don't just see something interesting. You start to, it infers something. It attaches to some of the rule lineages in your mind of how, well, this makes sense, and this is this type of a player, and this corresponds this way, so maybe look for this aspect. And you have this grid you can put over the game, this framework, all these implied concepts, this value system that you can judge the game by. That isn't just, did he get the kill? Is he ahead in CS? In CS, did he kill the player? Did he win a clutch round? Did they win the round? It isn't just the simple metrics on scoreboards and numbers on a screen. So let's get into the false idols. The three things which have replaced the eye test for so many people. Because we didn't have stats and Reddit, etc. back in the day, 1.6. And we did in League of Legends, but not in Dota. So as a result, you had to just go based on what you could see in the game and how good you thought the player was. So let's start with Reddit narratives, shall we? Right? We can break Reddit narratives down in a whole bunch of aspects. We're talking about community perception. So that's like, what do they think of the player? So in CSGO, if they think Ziwu is better than Simple, as you've seen if you go and read some of the forums, nothing will convince them otherwise. No amount of eye test, no amount of literally individually dominating or dominating with worse teammates or a worse team or in a certain key match, nothing will convince them otherwise. They just stick to whatever they like. Could be stats, could just be their particular preference, could be that they're French. Always on that I'm not a favourite of, just kidding. Or am I? If they think Bjergsen is better than Jensen, always has been, always will be, always was every season, again, nothing can change that for them. They are just stuck with that community perception. They will propagate that around the scene, and nothing you say, no argument will get into that. Then there's also the aspect of what is the role or what is the value within the team that these fans think that the guy has when they talk about him on Reddit. So in CSGO, Simple in the last year or so has been doing almost everything on CT side for Na'Vi. He has to basically play above and beyond and go to an insane level to give them a chance on some of these CT sides. But the fans won't get that. They'll just look at the numbers, which don't tell you any of those things, and they'll just say, well, this guy has better numbers or this guy has comparable numbers. In League of Legends, it doesn't matter if Faker actually was quite underwhelming at times in Season 9. I wasn't even close to the best mid lane in Korea. Hadn't been for 3 or 4 years. But because he won 3 championships in a row, he must still be one of the best. Even Brother Pros were citing him as that sense. So he just gets to carry that carry role for years and years beyond his actual prime, beyond him actually even being a carry in his team. Remember, in Season 9, it was fucking Clid and Teddy that were the best players in that team. If they can appreciate his play is another aspect of community perception. There's certain aspects of play that they don't appreciate. That's why in CSGO, MSL and Existence were always treated like shitter in-game leaders for many years. Despite the fact, if you talked to actual people who'd played with them privately or other coaches or people, especially outside the public eye, they'd tell you like, oh, this was brilliant, or wow, he did that, but it didn't work out in terms of the team winning the round because he didn't have the right piece. Like, they would tell you these guys were way above the community perception. In League of Legends, quite frankly, with the exception of Unicorns of Love in the beginning of 2015 and then Worlds for Misfits in 2017, I think Power of Evil has been criminally underrated. Just because he didn't have the raw flash, just because he didn't play the sexy champions, just because he isn't a big talker, people ignore that this guy was like Froggen Jr. At this point, he's probably actually taken over the lineage that Froggen put forward in the game. Just a really consistent carry in the way that he carries the game, and if you play to his style, you will have success. Then also there's the sticky storylines or details or moments. So for example, there's this notion that anyone can be the star in Astralis because different maps, they'd have a player top frag or do pretty well in terms of the stats. And yet they ignore that. Well, Device won most of the MVPs. If you ask other teams, most of them are probably going to tell you, right? Device is probably the best player overall. Meanwhile, if you go back, the actual team that always applied to, in my opinion, was Fnatic from 2014 to 2015. Because you started out and you had like Crims and JW were monsters. At Majors, it'd be Flusher who came alive. Olaf Meister from like February 2015 till the end of that lineup was insane. But the whole point is they would almost rotate. They could have a different best player depending on the month in a way that never was the case for Astralis, really. It's just that their players stats-wise would be closer to Device. And Device clearly wasn't the super hard carry in the way a Simple or a Ziwu or a Nico was. In League of Legends, the example I would give is When people talk about Season 7 for Faker, they remember, right, well, on paper, he won LCK, and then he won MSI, and then he came second in summer, and then he made the final of Worlds. And at Worlds, he hard carried on the utility champions and played amazing all over the map. So they go, this was maybe his best year ever. Was it fucking anywhere close? Season 3, Season 5 are way above that level. Even in Season 6, he's still a very strong player. For me, you go back, in the spring, he was a good player. MSI, I thought he was already really flawed, but because they won, it distracted from that. And then making the final in summer, that was being clutch. In the actual final at Worlds, he was sick and carried them all the way to there, but you can't ignore what happened the rest of the whole year wasn't dynamite for this guy. Remember the standards this guy set and how good Korean mid laners are and can be, and even were at that point in time. Then, how about the other one with Faker? That remember when his LeBlanc failed in Game 5 against CDG of the MSI final, right? First of all, his coach didn't play him for the first 2 games, therefore putting him putting him into a situation in the series where he already had to go, in fact, maybe even the first 3 games, he had to go ham, and he did at times. And also, he'd played less games by the end than the EDG players. And then his LeBlanc was actually carrying the end of the beginning of that game. But all his teammates fed kills all over the map. And all of a sudden, a comp that was designed to stop him was just way too powerful. And no human could ever have carried that game. He was still a god on that champion. I can even see why he picked it. How about this aspect for Reddit narratives? How popular a player is. This is distinct from perception, though, because, for example, in CSGO, an Astralis player is going to be in an echo chamber in terms of praise due to how Reddit works. They've just got in their minds that they're the best. Everything's great about them. The org's amazing. The technique of how they've developed these players is sick. They're all the ultimate professionals. Well, similarly, if Simple or Ziwoo's individual players say something, people are going to take it on board. People are going to take it as fact. People are going to put it in place of what they thought in their own minds. That's how you actually know that Nico from FaZe Clan, team he used to be in, really fucked up. That people finally started to think, maybe he's full of shit and actually doesn't know what he's talking about. Then in League of Legends, if it's a TSM player or a Fnatic player, likewise, there's going to be an insane bias where everything that they say that's good about them is upvoted, and except for the rare occasion, most of the other stuff's going to be downvoted, and you're just never going to notice that that opinion exists because it's been filtered out of the community by a few nutters. Likewise, if players like Faker, like Bjergsen say anything about any player, magically it's amazing. It's why Koreans used to praise Westerners knowing they'd get some fans and just lie and be like, yeah, he's almost as good as we are, actually, even though they didn't think that at all. That's how you know, by the way, similarly, people really dislike Jensen, probably because of his contentious early period. He's always come off as a little bit aloof, a little bit cocky, etc. So they ignore what a brilliant player he is. And it doesn't matter what he says, he has to be salty and a loser. But Bjergsen could say the same thing, and he's just a winner and wow, great trash talk. Then we come to player narratives, what pros think. So I'll give you some examples. They used to think right up until even the team was winning the major in that 2017, late 2016, 2017 period, even when they were winning, there were loads of top pros didn't think they were the true number one, didn't think they were the best team in the world, didn't think they were actually that good. Back in 2015, I had a number of legendary pros tell me that Cajun B was the best player in TSM, not Device. Eye test busted. How about people who are pro players in 2019 and 2020 still saying in interviews like, of course, FaZe has all these like star fraggers and 5 aimers and stuff. It's like, what are you talking about? You're pros and you play them. What the fuck are you talking about? In League of Legends, this whole myth that like, Bjergsen's like the best teammate you could imagine. It's like, listen, he's very good in certain areas. He's developed a lot as a person, but he is massively lacking in certain areas. What are you on about? The idea Reckless is just always the best AD carry. That's because they see him winning. That's because they like him as a person. That's because they see how much he practices. That's because they see that he plays consistently. They'll ignore that sometimes someone else was better. How about what pros say? Because that's different to what they think. Notice the things I'm saying there. A lot of those are things I've heard people privately say, or they say in some context, but more what they think. When they say things, well, how about when CSGO pros tell you Nico's a good IGL? I've had enough detective work on you that to show you what nonsense that is. Because not in the context of what I consider good IGL. Now, Yanko in his reflections, he's looking for a guy who's a man with authority and will really tell you and make a decisive choice. Those are some components of a good IGL, not a great one. And I don't think he had the rest of the game, quite frankly. How about when pros tell you, Forest is still world class, as late 2019? As though that's even vaguely plausible if you watch his team, if you watch who the ones carrying are, and you watch it, it's just the odd game that he was going off. It's just that people would go mental for one map, and then they'd chill for the rest of the time. It's like when people used to say that players like Kobe or LeBron now, like they're at their best now, like they might be at their smartest now. They might be very efficient now. They're nowhere near their peak. Let's be real. How about the Shy in League of Legends saying that Khan, this is at the end of Season 9, is the ideal top laner? Is this guy brain dead? He isn't. He just has a totally different vision of the game. But holy fuck, that's so far off. How about Cersei when he was in the Splice team coming on my Elitist United show and trying to convince me that like there's a different narrative as to why he's doing stuff early game. That's why actually he's the best style and makes the most sense. And actually he is good early game and all the rest. And what are you even talking about? And then the gold stats and that. It's like, motherfucker, you're farming. Like, you're trying to just negate him. You're not even trying to make players now. Like, why are you spinning this narrative? Like, but if you imply it's like Koreans or Chinese, then wouldn't I say it was good? It's like, no, what nonsense is this that's spilling out of your mouth? Then there's how pros see the game. So in CSGO, there were a lot of pros, a lot of legendary pros, where they only respect balls. They're men's men in that regard. So they don't respect players who play with tactics. Well, until they lose to them, and they eventually just have to, because otherwise their brain's not going to allow them to improve in the game. How about League of Legends pros who think everyone in their team is a shot caller and has an equally important voice? Meanwhile, they're playing with Yellow Star, Mithy, like Afromu. And then later, bizarrely, when they're not playing with those players, so all of a sudden the team collapses and there isn't really like a central guiding vision and no one seems to really know what's going on. How about pros that think nobody chokes or nobody's too inexperienced and everyone's just good, and if we all hope and pray and hold hands, we're all going to make it, boys? Like, it's ridiculous the things that pros say, and people base their whole opinions off this. How about stats? So in CSGO, obviously we're talking about the HLTV scoreboard stats, right? They've got the kills, deaths, kill death differential, ADR, KST, rating, right? Kill to death differential is all right, but even then you need to know the context of their role, the map, what side did they start on. ADR's usually better. If you have a high ADR, you probably had a pretty good game. KST's all right. At least it measures some other aspects. Rating is all over the place, in my opinion. I see players with like average ratings all the time. If you watch it with the eye test, you're like, that guy was the key pivotal factor to winning this game. Like, he did some amazing work. What, and this other guy has a higher rating? You know, the rating, by the way, implies that player performed better. So it's telling you who the best player is using a fucking number. That's insane. Rating can't take into account dominance in the really important rounds or what you did for your team that set up kills that show up on someone else's part of the scoreboard. It can't do any of those things. I think in League of Legends, it's probably the stupidest game ever for stats, because the game itself snowballs in favour of the winning team. Champion matchups don't show up on a box score in terms of like who's supposed to win this, what's the normal metrics for it. There's still no elite metrics as far as I'm concerned. Like, the idea that gold lead is reliable, it's only reliable in the sense that it correlates. Like, yeah, teams with a 3k gold lead tend to win 70% of the time. It doesn't tell you if this team's going to win this game, though, because it can't account for, have you actually used that gold and gone and bought the items yet? When did you buy the items? When are your power spikes? When do your champions stop scaling? The gold lead isn't some absolute value in that sense. So as I've always said about stats, they're great starting points for discussions that could be really interesting. They're terrible ending points or deciding factors. It's why I think the HLTV top 20 is actually whack. It just goes off things like rating and stats, and you're going to decide who the 20 best players in the world are. How about watch the games and decide and use your metrics and your criteria? It's why I hate in League of Legends when they use stats for a League of Legends laner in terms of like DPM or how much damage in a team fight he did. It's like, what champion was he playing? Was he playing the single damage output champion in one where it's like he's like a hyper carry, and then every champion there's like boosting him and giving him shields? Like, well, yeah, he should have done most of the damage. It doesn't mean he like disproportionately like carried the game in a traditional sense. Maybe other people were setting him up. I think in general, the eye test is busted. And I'll give you some examples. People in Astralis' prime not understanding the difference between how great their teamwork was and their structure and how good the talent and ability of the players were. So there was this whole thing of Astralis have the best players. Right? No, they had the best stats for their team on average. Now, maybe they had the best players for their roles at that time. Notice all the caveats I put in there. But that's even in the context of having each other that they made themselves like that. Like, I made this point about Zipnix. Actually, I'll put it in the description box below. It was a written article. That he's a fantastic player who adds a lot to Astralis. Like, for example, I think without him and Glaive, I think Device would be a significantly worse player. He'd still be a great player, but he wouldn't be like a dominant player who wins MVPs. I think, though, Zipnix himself benefits from Glaive's calling, from having a mobile AWP like Device, from having a great entry fragger like Dupree, from having a player who locks down sites like Magisk. That allows Zipnix the freedom to just win clutches in some games or just play a position smart and not always have to contribute tons of fragging. How about people not thinking Nico and Simple were gods for many years, just great players, and Cold Zero is just as good? Meanwhile, Nico and Simple are gods no matter who they play with and at what time in their career, seemingly. Cold Zero was a god for a couple of years playing with one core and in a certain meta. How about in League of Legends, where people thought Trick was an elite jungler in Season 6? Now, he was certainly doing a very good job in G2 and he fit their team well. But the idea he was winning the MVP... By the way, Perks wasn't even top 3 in that summer voting. Go back and look. How about the idea that Pawn was a sick mid laner in Season 4? Mate, he was the most overrated player in that team. He was just the weird fucking wild card. And in fact, the rest of the team allowed him to play that style. He would have fed his arse off in half the games in another team. How about Nemesis being world-class in Season 9 summer? He did a really great job in Fnatic and he matched up well against Caps in that final for G2. But was he world-class? I think you saw at Worlds. I think you saw when he really had to go against the whole field. On certain champions he was good and he was a player with certain prospects and potential. But world-class? No way. How about the idea that Soaz in Season 9 for Misfits and Season 10 for Immortals was just a bad player? He was just not good enough to carry. He's probably the only reason that team won some of those games, or were even in those games. And you could see how he even had to pick certain champions just to give them a chance to win those games. Like, in my opinion, you can go and I can contrast some more for eye test show-ups of where people don't know what the fuck they're talking about. How about when people used to say before 2018, when the stats just went out of control, that Simple was just misplaying situations and putting himself in bad spots? No, he had a new philosophy and methodology to how to play Counter-Strike. That would be like watching Michael Jordan play and only knowing the basics of basketball and going, well, these are bad shots. Look, he's being guarded and they forced him to the baseline, hard shot, and he's taken a fadeaway jump shot. That's actually like usually a low percentage shot for a basketball player. He should probably just pass. No, because he was the master at that. For him, that was a good shot. That's why he still shot a fantastic percentage with it. How about Anthony Davis, a massive big man with all this strength, athleticism in his prime physically, just go to the basket all the time, mate? No, he had an unbelievable butter mid-range jumper. And if you couldn't guard that and you couldn't stop him getting it off because of how tall he was, now he opens up the basket anytime he wants. Unbelievable. By the way, the worst I ever saw this in the NBA was back in like 2006, 2007, 2008 era when people used to say about Dirk Nowitzki, like, he's a big man, get your ass on the block and back him down, mate. This is one of the all-time great shooters and finesse players who, if he shoots correctly, his shot is almost unblockable. What are you talking about? Basketball's not just about raw power. It never has been. There's an element that can be about that, but it isn't all the time. That's not the ultimate value in the sense that just fragging isn't the best thing in Counter-Strike. How about that? If you talk to people who know the game and you watch with your eyes and you understand the game, Existence's strats in 2015 at times were god tier. That's why they would literally short circuit prime Fnatic in their era. Despite the fact he had talents like busted up RPK and really at the end of his tether Maniac. How about when... Before the stats went out of control for Breezy, everyone used to never shut up raving about Cirque Sorping because it was flashy, Ethan because he had that crazy pixel perfect aim. Meanwhile, Breezy was the real solid carry of that team. He was the one really doing the work. He was on the whole structure pretty much relied on. You saw when his game went away at the end of the year, that team plummeted. They face planted as a squad. How about in League of Legends? The NIP squad in Season 4 where they kept using good junglers online who weren't good enough to play the offline qualifiers for LCS. So they wouldn't get no LCS and then fans would go, you're overrating them. They're not that good. Their players aren't that good really. Their players, aside from the junglers, who they would just use bad ones for LAN, were unreal. They were some of the best in the entire West at their roles. Zora Zero, the top laner, probably the best top laner. Nukeduk, a strong mid laner. Mithy, in my opinion, maybe the best support player. Really smart, really great mechanics at the time. Freeze, a minimum above average AD carry. Still one of the better ones for my money. How about the idea that Doublelift couldn't have been the best AD carry until he won in Season 5 summer because his team wasn't making the finals of playoffs? And, like, if they're so good, why don't they win, bro? Like, look at it with the eye test, mate. He was a monster. That bot lane was unreal for years prior to winning. How about this year, where Larson in the summer didn't get full MVP credit from people? Listen, I get it. I don't mind Caps winning either. But he didn't even get the credit that he was truly in the contention because he's just playing boring champions in Oriana, just farming, and then he wins the team fight. Like, anyone can do it. No, they can't. That's really hard. He mastered that craft to some degree. Watch out for this guy. As long as he can overcome some of his psychological issues, he's going to be a monster in years to come. Maybe not for noobs. So develop your eye test. Anyone, fan, pro player, expert. You can't fake the funk with this. Back in 1.6, what I used to do was just cram hit demos. I'd watch the same POV and I'd get as many as I could, as many reps as I could in on my mind, so that then it would train it to understand and visualize what the player was doing. In League of Legends, I find it's useful to stop the game, read expert opinion on it, look at the context of what items do they have, where they are in the game right now, what would be the right... Better than just looking at a flow of movements and going, well, that was great, or wow, what a great kill, he carried the game. Develop your eye test, or you're always just going to be following the false idols of our scene. This video was kindly supported by Lager15, Pronogo, Mohammed Alabdul, Razzaq, Dean Tanglis, Animosity, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Hades, Jensen Goh, Zoomba, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Do you want to ask me a question in one of those monthly AMAs I do? Would you like teasers for who's going to appear next on my content? Or would you even like to take part in one of those crazy donated discussions I do where we go all over the place? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.